This is Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network, and I am your host, Mark. Today's guest exemplifies perseverance, not just with his music, but with this podcast. There were a few technical issues which have hopefully been overcome with clever editing. Welcome the one and only Robyn Hitchcock. He's written a memoir about his life in 1967. In fact, it's called 1967, How I Got There and Why I Never Left. It's a very unique take on a memoir that works really, really well. But before we hit on the book, Robyn helps me set things up by going over his life before 1967. He also talks about things that happened after 1967, like forming the Soft Boys and why they broke up and then reunited at one of Matthew Seligman's parties. Robyn talks about his solo career, why he went solo in the first place, and why he considers himself the reverse of an innovator. We also discuss some of his unique aspects of his solo work, like teaming up with Grant Lee Phillips, doing a film project with the late, great Jonathan Demme, and after decades of being a singer-songwriter, releasing an album that is entirely instrumental. Once we do get into the book itself, there are even more amazing stories, like discovering Bob Dylan, learning a bit about guitar, and attending The Happening with Brian Eno. Did you know Eno was the first app developed in 1967? That's a science fact. Another science fact is how good his memoir is. So go grab it from Akashic Books, Little Brown Books if you're outside the US, or wherever you buy books these days. Follow Robyn at Robyn Hitchcock Official on Instagram, at Robyn Hitchcock on X, and follow us at Performance ANX on both. Grab merch at performanceanx.threadless.com and contribute to our coffee fund at ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety. Now let's take a trip back to 1967 with Robyn Hitchcock. And maybe we won't leave either on Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network.
Okay. Hi, folks. You're listening to Performance Anxiety with Mark Shea and me, his guest this week, Robyn Hitchcock. I have a fab new book out called 1967, How I Got There and Why I Never Left, which you can order from various places. Anyway, I am either about to talk to Mark or just have been talking to Mark. Can you edit that bit? Sorry, is that okay? Mark, hello.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm slightly deaf and invisible, but otherwise I'm fine.
Good.
Can you hear me? Or I can't hear myself at all, but you can hear me.
Yes, sir. I can hear you just fine.
Okay, that's great. Where are you?
This is going to be kind of funny. I'm actually in Winchester, Virginia.
Oh, I've been there. I know. Yeah,
I love it. And when I started reading your book, I thought that was an amazing coincidence. Because you've got this fantastic book out, which we'll get into in a second. But the fact that you went to Winchester College and I'm living in Winchester, Virginia, I thought that was a very awesome coincidence.
It is. I wonder how many other Winchesters there are.
I know of one in, I think, Connecticut or Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And that's about the only other one in the U.S. that I know of. There's there's one in California as well.
That figures.
But yeah.
People further west, they take the name with them, you know.
Exactly. The further west you go, the less creative they get.
Or maybe the more homesick they get. So they just want to drag their old country, their old nation names with them, you know.
Hey, maybe.
It's like when you go to Australia, or you'll find a lot of British names there. Can you hear me okay still now? I've taken one earphone out just so I can.
Yes, I can.
I can hear me and you. Okay, this is an almost perfect situation.
Excellent.
Good.
So I like to usually go into a deep dive on my guest. The problem is that in your case, it would take like 5 Zoom links for me to do justice to your career because it's been so vast and you've been so
prolific. It's a long one.
It is. Yeah. And you put out so much amazing music that it's difficult to do anything comprehensive in an hour to an hour and a half. So
yeah.
So, and I know I can't keep you all day. So you've got other people to talk to, unfortunately. But I want to do an overview of your childhood a bit, because your book is about a watershed year for you. And it's, the book is coming out and it's about 1967. But I want to find out a little bit about pre-1967. Was there a lot of music growing up in your house? I know 67 is when music really had a deep impact on you, but was it making an impact on you prior to that?
Oh, music was always there. I mean, the first records I had were Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and the Comets.
Yes.
And you know that one?
Absolutely. I love that one.
And I had a Lonnie Donegan record. Lonnie Donegan was like he was our sort of skiffle star.
Yeah.
Skiffle was a kind of, it would be called Americana now. It was sort of rock and roll, but kind of less glamorous. It was T-chest basses, somebody standing on literally or originally, would have been just a square box with a broom handle shoved in the middle, and somehow you could make that into a double bass.
Oh.
I know there was one of those in John Lennon's first band. The Quarrymen was the skiffle band. So it was basically our version of rock and roll in Britain.
Okay.
So Lonnie Donegan was a skiffle star. So he sang American songs, like I'm Alabama Bound and that kind of thing.
Okay.
First I'd ever heard of, I heard of it as Alabama before I heard of Alabama. And that would have been my first links with America before I had any concept of nations, really. Would have just been this music coming through to me as a 3-year-old. And I would, wave my arms around and totter around in front of the record player.
Sweetie,
hello.
Pay attention.
Welcome back, Mark. Yes, sorry. Emma knows how to operate machinery, and I don't.
Oh, not about
just 21st century machinery. Yeah, so we had instrumental records, and then the Beatles appeared, and all of that is in the book. When my dad walks into the room with a transistor radio and says, "You might like this," and it's the Beatles. And the Beatles seem to arrive from all directions. They'd arrive from older people like my father, who said, "This might be something you enjoy," which was nice of him. And the people I was at school with, suddenly the word appeared. And so from 1963 onwards, there was pop music. There were only about 2 hours of it a week on the radio.
Oh, wow.
In Britain, but on the BBC, and there was Radio Luxembourg, where you could hear pop records at night sometimes, which was a sort of commercial station broadcasting from Luxembourg. So because pop music was quite hard to access, everybody made a big point of listening to it. You get the same thing. You get stories of, Robbie Robertson or someone, listening to sitting up in Canada, listening to some station broadcasting from Detroit or something.
Right.
It was hard to access. Everybody would lie under the bedclothes or whatever and go, wow, what is this stuff? It mattered. That was the important thing, that music mattered. And then, rock and roll, pop. And then in the book, I go off to this quite arcane, rarefied, one-sex monastic boarding school with all the overtones that has.
Right.
And we don't have the radio, but we have a record player. So other kids would bring in records and we would be saturated. There would be what I came to know as heavy rotation. So like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan was in heavy rotation. So in the course of 6 weeks, I moved over from, a kid who liked the Beatles and wanted to be Doctor Who and had my model buses and my Daleks and my plastic guns and all the apparatus of childhood. I was fast-tracked into Bob Dylan land. I hadn't even reached physical puberty. I was still a squeaky little kid. But I was very aware of the fact I was a squeaky little kid, and I was surrounded by boys who were in various phases of the ladder of puberty, moving up, getting hairier and bigger. And the fully grown boys had these huge boots, like policemen's boots,
Right.
And They get you to polish them. Could have been worse. I wasn't beaten up or anything.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
But my whole focus became hearing these records and the ones I really liked. There were lots of things I quite liked, like the Rolling Stones and the Kinks and the Spencer Davis Group. But this guy on this orange label, because Columbia CBS Records was orange in Britain, it was red over here in the States.
Right, yeah.
But the American guy on the orange label, Bob Dylan, he became a kind of mecca. He became within 2 or 3 months, and this is a large part of what my book is about, I was rewired to Dylan. And then in 1967, Dylan was actually mute. He was off the map. He'd had a bike crash or whatever. He wasn't there anymore.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But being into Dylan galvanized me about music in a way I hadn't been before. I loved the Beatles, but I never thought I'd write songs. I didn't have any musical talent. I used to write poems and I drew and stuff.
So prior to that, you weren't playing any music? Did you take any lessons? Did you know how to play any instruments or sing at all?
No, not at all. I mean, I used to sing along to things, but right. I didn't think of myself. I remember walking along at the age of 10 and thinking, what happens? How do you make up a tune? What does that go? Right. But I did used to sing words to other people's instrumentals. So if there was there was a phase of British, what I suppose you'd call it British surf music. People like instrumental groups like the Shadows and Jet Harris and Tony Meehan and people who were a bit like, not quite sure what the American equivalent was, but it was sort of twangy. There was a lot of instrumental hits.
So kind of like the Ventures and
yeah, like that. And that was something going before the Beatles, and after the Beatles, that kind of killed it off. The last instrumental hit was Albatross by Fleetwood Mac.
Oh, well, that's an amazing song.
Which the Beatles then kind of echoed for the song "The Sun King." So I got. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm wandering the canyons of the past here.
That's what the whole show's about.
I listened to those instrumental songs, and I would start to make up lyrics to them, kind of nonsense lyrics, but I just fit them in. But I never thought of becoming a songwriter until I discovered Dylan, and then in the book, the 1967 book, because the book's really about 66 as well.
Yeah.
The pundits will tell you there would have been no 67 without 66, and they're right. Because, of course, otherwise there'd have been a weird edit between 65 and 67. But you can also tell, you can tell by looking at a photograph, or I can, a cognoscenti of that era can, the progress between 63 to 69, because each year has a very distinct look, and then it begins to blur a bit,
Right.
Whereas it would be hard to find a photograph taken now and go, oh my God, that is so 2024.
Exactly. And music is the same way.
We've looked much the same for the last 20 or 30 years. And I wouldn't know what the costume changes were.
And the music is the same, because the music sounds basically the same for the last 20 years. It's all that heavier alternative sound. It's grungy almost, but, from 2000 and now, the same songs could have been released 20 years apart and still make the charts.
Things that the development isn't in music and fashion so much. It's actually obviously in technology.
Right.
The way you can tell now from 20 years ago is the kind of phone you've got, what your phone did.
In fact,
our phones are actually they age faster than we do.
Yeah, and the fact that we can do this podcast like this, I'm assuming you're in Nashville at the moment, and me in Winchester, Virginia.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have been able to do this 20 years ago.
No, it would have. But actually we couldn't. Yeah. So the evolution that was happening was very much in music and in visual fashion, culture, all that lot.
Yeah.
And I just My book is basically about the 1966, 67 bit as I perceived it. And basically, it also gives you context for me. It explains, if anything can explain, why I do what I do and the direction my life took. So rather than writing a whacking great, so in 1979 I said, or, 1984 was the first time I ever saw Minneapolis, or I'll never forget meeting, REM or whatever. I've just done this one primal year, which is everything comes out of that,
right?
For me.
Right. Well, that year seems to have informed your entire discography. There's certain sounds and things that just recur throughout your career, like the beautiful jangly guitar sound that you have, some of the lyrical things that come through.
Yeah.
There's a recurring theme of death a lot in your music. And it's definitely a year that it made an impact on you, which is that the reason why you decided to kind of stick with the 66, 67 year, because it had such a dramatic impact on your sound?
Yes, my sound, my thinking, my lyrics, the way music was, by the end of it, I just thought, I want to do this, I wasn't quite sure what this was, but I just thought, I want to do more of this. I didn't think I want to be an innovator the way Dylan and the Beatles and Pink Floyd and Jimi Hendrix are innovators. I should go out and innovate too. I'm the reverse of an innovator. I'm sweeping up after them. I started making records 10 years afterwards, by which time, so much had moved on. And with the Soft Boys, I just wanted to have harmonies, chiming guitars, a certain kind of lyric. You could call it surrealist. You could call it oblique. You could call it in a private code, whatever you would call it. And you will either pick up on it or not, depending on who you are and where you're coming from. Right. Most people can't hear what I'm singing and can't see what I'm doing. I'm invisible to them because I'm using a system they don't pick up on. They would just go, what's this?
Right.
Or
wow.
I can't hear it. What is this music? It wouldn't make, what I do would not resonate with 99.99 people in the world, percentage,
right.
And I know that. But nonetheless, it's what I want to produce. And weirdly, when it hit me, it was popular. The Beatles were the most popular group in the world. They were the Taylor Swift or Harry Styles, whatever, of their day.
Right. Oh, yeah, yeah.
And now that kind of music is what you would call niche.
Yeah.
But I've been lucky enough to be able to do it. And thanks to the good old USA, I have an audience still. And for the last 40 years, that people have come along to shows and bought records and just kept me going. But it's largely America. That's why I'm here. And it keeps me going. One
of the things that I always loved, and I want to ask you a little bit more about the Soft Boys in a second, but I kind of want to just say this because it's important to me getting introduced to you. You were I'd always heard of Robyn Hitchcock and the Soft Boys, but honestly, it wasn't until you started doing tours and playing around with Grant Lee Phillips that I went, I need to pay more attention to this person, because I have been a huge Grant Lee Phillips fan for years.
Oh, yeah.
And then and I'm like, if Grant is into this guy, I got to check this guy out. And that's when I really started to notice music and go back and start to listen. And so I really appreciate him bringing you to my attention.
Oh, that's nice. Did you see any of the shows that Grant and I did? It was 2000 AD. We did a bunch of them.
Unfortunately, I was not able to. I was living in Southeast Alabama at the time. And I don't think you guys went down to Enterprise, Alabama, unfortunately. So
no, sadly, we missed that. Had we but known.
Exactly. So you mentioned starting to actually play music and record music 10 or so years after this big influential time frame. the music that was really coming up at that time was more punk, and punk means a lot of things to a lot of people, especially in that period. But from what I understand, it wasn't necessarily jangly guitars and harmonies. How were the Soft Boys? But you guys you made inroads. I mean, people who were into punk liked the music. Isn't that right?
No.
Yes, no.
No.
Okay.
I think basically punk became...
Oh, no. Arr. Oh, no.
Oh, he's back.
There we go.
Sorry, I don't know why that happens, and I don't know why it stops.
Oh, sometimes,
but it stopped again.
The internet may be a little unstable on one of our ends, so that's
okay.
Possible.
All right, but no, just going back to punk because it's a really important point. It was sort of, I think everything was the sound of punk was what became known as punk.
Yes,
was very. In Britain, it was very kind of raw and crude, and the idea was that it then very quickly it kind of had developed an orthodoxy or a philosophy. Possibly it was the music press that did that rather than the musicians themselves. You know,
that would make more sense.
I was friends. Used to hang out a lot with Captain Sensible, the bass player of the Damned, and then guitarist. And he said, well, when punk started, the idea was you could just be anything you wanted. But very quickly, everybody started copying everybody else, and you had to go down very narrow pathways.
Right.
And he was a big champion of the Soft Boys and what I did. But he also loved all the old 60s stuff. You know, he was another Syd Barrett fiend. And I think... you know, we definitely we sped up and we probably became more aggressive and more paranoid to kind of blend in with the punk ethos. You know, everybody had to stop wearing flared trousers. You know, by the beginning of 1977, I still had a beard and flared trousers. And by the middle of 77, my beard had gone and the flares had gone. And that kind of applies to every would-be musician in Britain, you know. So we sped up and got more paranoid, but we were more about, it was a bit more inventive. I was a big fan of Captain Beefheart, and there was a little window in the art end of punk, the new wave end of punk, that was where you were allowed to be experimental. You were just not supposed to use things that had been general currency. You know, you were not supposed to use harmonies. You were not supposed to use guitar solos. You were not supposed to try and sing in tune. It was better if you shrieked or squawked and you hit bum notes and you played as aggressively as possible. But there were people like, actually generally American acts like Perubu and the Red Crayola, and a British band called the Pop Group. And the sort of art, for want of a better word, the art end of sort of the music business and the rock writers particularly would have liked to put the Soft Boys in there, that we were seen as experimental. Actually, posthumously, the Soft Boys, what we played was art rock, but you can't play art rock in your time. Like the two great art rock bands are the Velvet Underground and Roxy Music, and they both became art rock bands afterwards. At the time, nobody knew what the hell they were.
Right.
And the same kind of applies to the Soft Boys, except we were more like the Velvet Underground in that we never had hits or anything. We just existed for a brief time in a brief space and disintegrated. Whereas Roxy Music actually became pop stars, you know. But it's all part of not marketing yourself. I'm not I've never been good at marketing myself.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. The Soft Boys end basically in 81, and you also release your first solo album in 81. Was that in the works with the Soft Boys? Was there a reason the Soft Boys ended and you started a solo career in the same year?
Oh, I was already making my solo record. I wanted to be a solo act, really. I didn't particularly want to be part of a group.
Okay.
My ego was that large. And but the Soft Boys had other ingredients, as you just showed me that photo of Katrina and the Waves. Kimberly had all along. Kimberly Rue is a great songwriter, and he'd been writing songs all along, but they weren't really the songs that I couldn't imagine them being part of the Soft Boys, and I probably also just. He was gestating all these songs that then became things like Walking on Sunshine. Okay. And there's no way Walking on Sunshine would have been a hit for the Soft Boys.
I can't even imagine that.
Basically, he reunited with his old drummer, Alex Cooper, and they hooked up with Vince and Katrina, who were two American kids on the army bases in East Anglia, which is where Cambridge is. In East Anglia in Britain, England. Okay. And anyway, they did that. And they had some other songs, some really good songs. Going Down to Liverpool was a great one, which the Bangles covered. And quite a lot of songs that never came out, but Kim's always been a good songwriter. So there was all that waiting to happen.
Right.
And Matthew Seligman, everybody loved Matthew. Matthew was in about 4 bands at once. And so... There was just a point when we kind of dissolved the Soft Boys, and Matthew actually joined the Thompson Twins for a while.
Oh, really?
But then the Thompson Twins were pruned down to a trio, and Matthew wound up playing bass with Thomas Dolby. So he was in Thomas's band when he had the huge hit "Blinded Me with Science."
Oh, okay. I just had Kevin Armstrong on about a year or so ago.
Yeah. Oh, right. Well, Kevin was part of that group. Yeah. In fact, Matthew probably introduced Kevin to Dolby. I wouldn't be surprised. They were part of that South London mafia. So after the Soft Boys, by the mid-'80s, you had Matthew touring with Dolby, Kimberly touring with Katrina and the Waves, and Maurice Windsor joined me, the Soft Boys drummer, and was touring with me and Robyn Hitchcock and the Egyptians. So we all kind of went off and had much more success than we'd done in the Soft Boys. Right. So it was probably a good move in the end. Well,
it produced some amazing music. You end up with the Egyptians, and I'd love to know. I'm big into photography. I went to college for photography, and I do a lot of live music photography. So film is a little bit of a progression of that. And I'm curious how the Jonathan Demme film came about, because that kind of thing fascinates me. How did you meet Jonathan, and how did I guess it's kind of a documentary film.
Oh, no, I wish it was more of one, actually, but I haven't seen it lately. It's Jonathan Demme, the late Jonathan Demme, the late, great Jonathan Demme, appeared in my dressing room in Nyack in upstate New York after a show in early 1995. And, I mean, he was a big music fan. He most famously did the Talking Heads movie, but he'd done videos for people like UB40, and he'd done quite a lot of worked for Neil Young, and music was very important to him. He liked featuring music in his movies. And so I guess he knew my stuff, whatever. He came and said hello, and within a fairly short time, we had arranged to make an in-concert movie, and he found enough sponsorship. He got enough money from what was then Orion Pictures to do that. So late the following year, he rented a storefront on West 14th Street in New York and put in 4 cameras. This was just at the end of the days when everything was on film.
Yeah.
So and also on tape. So we had a truck outside taping it all on 2-inch tape, and we had 4 cameras with celluloid, and we had lights and wardrobe and stuff like that. Although actually I just brought my own shirts, so it didn't really make any difference. But we did the same show 4 times over, and the show was a bit long. And I put in too many of my new songs, which I rather regret because most of them weren't that good. But he's got a few of my sort of perennial songs like Glass Hotel and Airscape.
And in the element of light, the sun reflected from the waves ensure its spangles. The child of air is born upon the wind that blows across the sea.
And there's, I don't remember, Guildford is in there. There's a couple of good new ones, 1974, I think. And he very...
There we are.
Okay. Hello. Sorry. You once again, you vanished.
I know.
I vanished. This time you froze. It was interesting. I was watching your face, and then it just didn't move. I thought you were thinking for a while. You probably were thinking, but then you just vanished.
Usually, if that happens, you'll see smoke coming out of the ears or something. So.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. But you're back in motion. Yeah.
Good. So back in the early 2000s, we're kind of in that era anyway, the Soft Boys reformed and did a kind of a reunion album. What instigated that coming together of the Soft Boys?
I think we had nothing better to do, really. I toured with Grant Lee Phillips. I was out of Warner Brothers. My major label days were obviously over. Kimberly wasn't working with Alex Cooper and the Waves anymore. That had stopped. Matthew had long since stopped. Matthew had been an attorney, a barrister for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
At the end of the 1980s, Matthew's trajectory was fabulous. He went from the Thompson Twins to Thomas Dolby to playing, he played bass with David Bowie at Live Aid.
Oh, wow.
And Kevin Armstrong and Dolby and Matthew were Bowie's band.
Oh, wow.
And so they play at Live Aid. And I'm sure there's lots of footage of it. Matthew had a lovely sort of blue Chinese suit.
Oh, wow.
And he gets a name check from Bowie. And that had been his ambition. I remember him saying in 1980, I want to play with Bowie. Anyway, he did. And then after that, he played with Morrissey and a few people, but he got fed up with doing sessions, and he decided to use his education, because he'd been at Cambridge and he'd got a first in history. He was a bright lad. So he went to law school, and he'd been an attorney for 10 years. So we'd all kind of completed our trajectories, to use that word again. We'd all got as far as we were going to get. I was now a sort of folk singer guy on the American circuit, already beginning to become a nostalgia act, heading for 50. Kim wasn't really playing live. Morris was, I think, just working in his wife's family's garage. So we got together. I think Matthew was having a party. We all got together to play it because we'd all got along okay. There wasn't a big personality there wasn't any big sort of chasm to get over particularly.
Okay.
So we got together again and, I know what it was. We also re-released Underwater Moonlight, the Soft Boys, the album. We made 2 albums. One was Can of Bees, which was quite difficult and not many people liked it. And the other was Underwater Moonlight, which most people did like and still do.
Yeah.
So that was being re-released, for the 3rd time, I think, or 4th time on Matador Records. Oh. They did a deluxe version of Moonlight. Yeah, that's what it was. It was a whole thing. It was a 21st anniversary of Underwater Moonlight. And, the Soft Boys in our original days, which is still when we were at our most exciting, we played a week in New York in 1980 while John Lennon was still alive. I always fantasized that he might have gone past us in a taxi or a town car, while we were taking our first tottering steps on the canyons of New York, through the canyons of New York, but having our first triple-decker sandwiches. And
Cats is dead.
but the Soft Boys had never toured America, and since the Soft Boys, I'd got a career going in America, and the others had worked there as well, but we'd never done it as the quartet. So that's it. So we re-released Underwater Moonlight, decided to do a tour, and I was writing a lot of songs because it was nice being back with a band, especially a really good one. So we made a reunion album, and then, but after a while, it got, it was okay. I just didn't want to do it anymore, really.
Okay.
I think it just was a bit of a strain being in a band, having been a solo act. Because I was also still basically running it and managing it, but I was kind of having to do it on behalf of 3 other people as well as me. And so, and I think Matthew really thought that it was going to break big, and we were all going to become, rock gods and everything. And I think the rest of us realized that we'd done whatever we were going to do. We'd got as far as we were going to get, and this was more a sort of checking in with time. Hey, hello, here we are at the other end of our arcs. Right. I think Matthew kind of believed it was going to conquer the world or something, which 4 blokes of 50, 10 years after Britpop was probably a rather tall order.
My mind is connected to your dream. Your dreams are connected to the underside, where the skull of Africa hits the Horn of Florida, and petals ring in orbit.
So I slipped out of the Soft Boys, but I still work with Morris and Kimberly to this day, and Kim's wife Lee plays bass. So there's a sort of descendant of the Soft Boys that backs me up, but it's very much me. It's me, me and I love playing with them, but I don't, and I'm not tethered to songs from any era of the Soft Boys. I always play some old Soft Boys songs, but it's not centered around that. And I wrote the songs anyway in the Soft Boys. I don't know if I'm making much sense, but if you stretch it out, if you look at it over 47 years, whatever, when did we first start? 76. Morris is the one who's been in there consistently. And I've worked with Morris in quite a few combos outside of the Soft Boys, including the Egyptians, tours. So it's just the history of people that you work with, I suppose, and that kind of friendship.
You're still writing and producing, creating fantastic music like 2022's Shufflemania.
Shuffleman is ritzy, Shuffleman is rad. I'm gonna have what the Shuffleman had. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes.
beautiful album.
yeah.
I absolutely love it. But what I found fascinating was Life After Infinity. That's a gorgeous album.
Oh, you've heard it?
Yes. Yeah. What prompted you to do an instrumental album after, so many decades of being singer, songwriter?
Actually was obviously playing the guitar long before I was able to write songs. I got my first guitar in 1967. It's in the book.
Yep.
And I think by the end of the book, I've learned to tune it, but I haven't yet learned how to put a new string on it. I think it had colored nylon strings. And the thing is, basically, Mark, I've been improvising on guitar for far longer than I have been writing songs. And it just seemed like an idea to put some of those pieces down. Some of them more arranged than others, but they're all just, it's what I do. And regardless of whether I'm working on a song or not, I'll just sit there and play the guitar. So it seemed like a good idea. In fact, I think it was Emma's idea. She said, well, why don't you just record this stuff? But we didn't, it never was released. We didn't go through publicists or anything like that. I mean, obviously everything we do is on our label, Emma's label, really, Tiny Ghost.
Yes.
And then named after our cat, Tiny, who sadly only lived 6 months, but she left an enormous crater in our lives, little doll-faced Persian with a flat face, and she had some just awful rare disease, and she passed away, I think, before she was fully grown. And I'm holding Tiny on the cover of my self-titled album.
Okay.
And now we've got two beautiful cats called Ringo and Tubby. Tubby's just been wandering past me. But, so we named our label Tiny Ghost after Tiny, and the little cat drawing is basically a little drawing of Tiny.
Oh, okay.
But Emma runs the label, and she, we put out my old stuff, and whatever we do comes out on Tiny Ghost.
So Life After Infinity, was that all new material you were working on, or is that stuff that you've been playing around with for years? Oh,
some of it I've been playing around. Let's say it's been slowly evolving over the decades.
Okay, that's fair.
So you would have, if you'd found me 10 years ago, I'd have been playing earlier versions of that. But I think quite a few of them are in tunings as well. So if you alter the tuning of the guitar, it's quite easy to come up with other, just each new tuning inspires something else, musically. What
prompted you to begin writing the book? Because like we mentioned earlier, it's not a typical memoir. It's not a career retrospective or anything. It's a specific watershed in your life. What prompted, first of all, the book, and then to focus it so finely, I guess? Well,
I'm 71 now. I was 70 last year, and I've reached that memory almost full stage where if you want to write about anything in your life, now is the time to do it. If you leave it too long, it'll just vanish. Yeah. And there are so many reasons to write about 1967. But I mean, if you're me, and it just seemed like a very good time to do it. And I'd been writing a lot for Patreon and Facebook, and people would ask me to write, drone on about your 10 favorite psychedelic songs, or Instagram, somebody dies like David Crosby or Alex Chilton or something, and I'm going to write a sort of eulogy essay about them. And I've just been doing an awful lot of writing. And people had said over the years, why don't you do a memoir? And I couldn't, because as you said at the beginning of this podcast, it's too long. There's too many carriages.
Yeah.
There's no way of getting an overview of my life in one book. You know, when I'm gone, maybe someone will manage to do it, but I certainly couldn't. And again, Emma just said, pick one small period and write about it. And that was a no-brainer. You know, it has to be that time.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And that's a fantastic suggestion by Emma, because the book, it's so interesting. It's so well written. It's not like it's not like a Tolkien where, you know, you have a 100-page chapter or something. It's very easy to read, and it keeps you engaged in it the entire time. And I think my favorite part of it was the happening with Brian Eno. I absolutely love that section.
Oh, yes. Well, it was just one of those things that happenings happen, you know, they did. And also you're 14, whatever occurs seems to be natural because you haven't lived long enough for it to seem odd.
That's
so,
a good point.
Plus, you know, at that point, Brian Eno was
Oh, no. We'll get you back soon. I hope if I'm frozen, I'm at least not making a ridiculous face. Well, this face is ridiculous, so I guess it doesn't really matter. All right. We're back again.
Oh, hello. Yes, we are back. Brian Eno. Well, he had circular blue sunglasses. I don't know if they had lenses in them, but they were blue, and I'd never seen anything like it. I don't know whether John Lennon even had his national health glasses then or not, but these were blue and round, and his hair was receding already, but it was long. It was the longest hair I'd seen on a man. Came down to his shoulders. And, you know, he was skinny, as everybody was, and he just knew something. You know, he was an art student, but he obviously, I suspect he'd already heard the Velvet Underground, which was quite hard in Winchester in 1967, but because he had the, as I describe in the book, you know, he had the tape playing backwards and he had the violin drone. And,
right, yeah.
Or he'd listen to whatever the Velvet Underground were listening to. But the thing about him was that there was no one thing he necessarily did. He was already a kind of app. He was something that you could sort of apply to things to. You could put things through an Eno filter. This became more clear when he appeared in Roxy Music, and then when he became a sort of producer. He's not a recording engineer. He's not technically a musician. He's not even technically a singer. He's just somebody who, he's an artist, but he seems to just put things and people through this filter, which makes them sound more appealing or feel more appealing or look more appealing or be more appealing.
I love that.
I'd be interested to see what happened if you put Donald Trump through an Eno filter. Would he just vanish altogether? You know, would he just pop? What can you apply? But it's and I'm shocked I could never afford him. Yeah. I've met him a couple of times, and I always go on about the blue sunglasses, and he's very tolerant. But I'm way down the pecking order for somebody like him. But even back then, you know, he did these sort of concrete poems. He was working on an early version of his oblique strategies. You know, those cards he has where the idea is you're in this recording studio and you pull one out and it just gives you some advice.
Oh, okay.
You know, don't repeat yourself, or go outside, turn right, pick up a couple of blades of grass off and stick them into the neck of a bottle or something. I mean, not exactly that, but almost arbitrary instructions that you pick up from the cards. Yeah. And he was working on versions of that back in the 1960s. So they published them in the school magazine. But it was, I'm fumbling for is that there was something very conceptual about Brian Eno, but also very charismatic. And this being 1967 and me being 14, I just thought, oh, right, okay, this guy's a groover.
Yeah.
In fact, this guy was probably the grooviest entity I had yet spied,
Yeah.
And everybody at the college was in awe of him.
And that has never changed.
It hasn't changed, And then 5 years later, he turns up in Roxy Music. And then 5 years after that, he's working with David Bowie on Low, Bowie's and Heroes, Bowie's most sort of innovative bits of pop music.
Right.
Where Bowie's kind of producing, I think he even co-wrote Heroes, so you've got the element that's really pop, and then you've got the element that is very much belongs in the art galleries, it's not for the masses.
Right.
And Bowie managed to actually straddle that. And Eno was one of the people that helped him do it. And then Eno goes on to produce or do whatever he does to U2 and Pavarotti, and the rest is history.
Absolutely.
So if nothing else, it's funny that his first recorded appearance is in 1967 in my book. Yeah.
So where can people find the book, and how can they follow you and keep up with what you're doing?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, Mark. They can find me. Where can they find me? Well, the book is on Akashic Books over here, and you can, AKASHIC, and on Little Brown Books in Britain. And you can order the book from them. You can also order the book from us at Tiny Ghost, if you just look up Tiny Ghost on the web. And that will, I guess if you go to my website, it'll tell you where I am. I've got a few book readings and Q&As. So I've got about 4 of those over here. Oh, sadly, there isn't one in Winchester. I don't know. Is there a bookshop?
Yes. Yeah,
do you have a bookshop there?
Yes, we do. We have 1 or 2 small independent ones.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Do you have gigs at other shows in Winchester? Is there do people come?
Not so much, but we're about 90 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. So most people end up in there. And that's where I go and shoot most of my concerts and all. So.
What, you film shows?
I photograph them. Yeah.
Oh, you take photos from shows?
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I can.
Well, you're very welcome. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. I can shoot Emma a couple through the email and give you my Instagram link so you can take a look at some of the work that I've done. Yeah,
that would be great. I think I'm going to be back there in the autumn.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
So you're very welcome to come along.
Thank you.
Camera or no,